Today is June 27th, 2018. My name is Leah Cohen, and I'm joined here with Mr. Paul Barker. He was with the 1st and 3rd Marine Divisions in Vietnam and Okinawa. He gave a fascinating interview last year on May 16th, 2017, conducted by Mr. Tom Webb. Today, Mr. Barker will complement his previous interview by showing artifacts, maps, and photos that reflect his service in Vietnam.
Okay, thank you for that nice introduction. I should explain that in 1970, I was assigned to go to Vietnam, got hijacked somewhere over Alaska when we were refueling, and the whole plane load of us wound up redirected to Okinawa. So I spent 6 months on Okinawa with the 3rd Marine Division and had a lot of interesting adventures, all training kind of stuff, beach landings, spending Christmas in Hong Kong, jungle warfare training, and a lot of fun stories come out of that. But that's prior to the Vietnam experience. I got sudden orders saying, you're going to Vietnam in 15 minutes, pack all your stuff. And I was in Subic Bay, having been stationed on a ship. Flew back to Okinawa, got my tree suit, the camouflage suit that only Marines had. We were very jealous because jealous of not letting other people have camo like we did. And flew into Da Nang, and that will be the start of the pictures. I took a lot of pictures landing just because I was going into a war and I really didn't know what to expect, and I was anxious, and I was shooting pictures out the window. So it's just not quite like a flip chart where it looks like it's animated, but you can watch every 5 minutes of the landing. So before we do that, I want to get everybody oriented. It's the first step in a good presentation in the military is, here's the map, here's us, and here's them. And this way is north, okay? Now let's talk about it. Someone gave me a relief map made out of vacuum plastic of the Da Nang area. This little gray and brown spot is the town of Da Nang. And if you could see this in a close-up, you'd see that the airfield represents 2 long gray lines running north to south. The harbor is deep all along here. I think they could handle 4 deep draft ships at one time. I'm sure it's improved since then. This island out here is called Monkey Mountain. It was bristling with antenna because it was a good place to connect up to the city, and so that's where a lot of electronics were situated. I don't think there was ever any fighting out on Monkey Mountain. But to the west of the city were a lot of Army bases, and the Army areas were probably greater in square footage than the city itself. There was also a ring of military trash around the city that was maybe 1,000 yards wide, had barbed wire fences on either side. And it was just the accumulated stuff of 10 years of war. There were carcasses of vehicles, tanks, trucks, jeeps. And there were people living in all this trash and making a living by scouting it out, recycling parts. My cantonment, which was the name for a base camp back then, for 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, was right up against this ridge, tucked into a little notch in the ridges. And I'll show you pictures of that. I apologize for the tremor. I was exposed to Agent Orange right here on 11/92, a place that had been defoliated, and the symptoms didn't show up for 20-something years. So I had some free time in there, but now it's come back with a vengeance. And medication helps a lot, but there's still this annoying tremor, which means my penmanship would not past muster in second grade at this point. So when you're looking at the photographs, to keep yourself oriented, bear in mind that this way is north, this is the big harbor, this is the city at the south end of the harbor. There's a highway, Highway 1, the street without joy, that runs up to this side of Da Nang and connects up with the main street, and then runs along this beach and begins climbing up the mountains until it gets to this notch. That notch is called Hai Van Pass in Vietnamese. Hai Van means cloud pass. And the reason for it is clouds coming from the north are not high enough to get over these mountains. This is 3,000 feet. And so they try and squeeze through the pass. The end result is that if you're standing on the pass in bright, sunny, warm, tropical weather, 2 minutes later you could not see your hand in front of your face for the intense fog, it appears.
Wow.
And the cold wind and the dampness, and you start shivering, and then pop, the sunlight comes out and the cloud continues on its way to the south. It's an eerie place, and you'll see in the pictures that there's a strange old French fort up there. So Hai Van Pass is important. You can see Hai Van Pass from the base camp. All I had to do was photograph north. You see this bright white sand. You'll see that in the photographs too. Pictures will be taken from the top of the ridge behind the cantonment, looking down on this area. There's a river, the Sham Kude River in Vietnamese, in English, and a bridge, which you will see, it's a railroad and car bridge that is also critical, and it's next to a town called Kinh Ville. There's a village out here. In fact, there are two of them. I can only remember the name of one. Truc Dong is a Catholic village. And there's a second one with a cathedral in the middle of thatch roofs and mud huts. It's very interesting, obviously built by the French.
Was it built out of stone?
Yes, it's made out of limestone, has great rain stains, and it looks like it's been there since Notre Dame was built, I know they weren't there in the Middle Ages, but they're very, very Gothic and big enough that you could take the whole village, I think, inside. In this valley is mostly rice farming, but there's this one ridge that pops up, and you'll see pictures taken from a helicopter coming from this direction to land there. It's called OP Reno, to the Americans, Observation Post Reno. And it has a really interesting secret device on top of it, which I'll go into with the photographs. You'll also notice at the very beginning that the flight that I took from Okinawa into Vietnam flew over this little bump of land, you'll see that in the photographs, across the harbor with helicopters passing below us, until it got into this area where you could see Navy ships parked in the water and then landing. And you can see that it's a military airport because of all the fighter jets tucked into these half-round Quonset hut sort of things. So if you keep that in mind, it'll help you stay oriented. And in case you get lost, we'll issue maps later. Give you the grid coordinates for where you are. Okay. Chapter 1 is called Arrival in RVN, Republic of Vietnam. The flight over is about 3 hours, and it's from Kadena Air Force Base on Okinawa to Da Nang Air Base. And it was bright, sunny weather. And there were a bunch of my classmates from basic school, fellow officers, all of us butter bars, the little gold second lieutenant's bar.
Okay.
And this photograph number 1 is descending through a cloud cover that seemed a bit ominous because it looked dark even from above. See, I think I'll put these over.
Yeah, okay.
And that little landmass I showed you sticking out in the water, this is it. Haibon Pass is further up that same ridge underneath the clouds. You can't see it. But as we're descending through the clouds, the excited talk all dies down in the cabin and it starts getting very quiet. And we look down and there's a CH-46, which we're all familiar with from training and using them throughout the Marine Corps. It was sort of the Airbus of the Marines. There's a 46, that tiny little dot over the ocean. And in the background, you see a bit of the beach. And I realized we were pretty high up. Now you can see more of the beach and some of the white sand. And you can see Navy ships anchored in the harbor there. I didn't get a picture of the big one, the Repose. It was a hospital ship that looked like a destroyer. It was so big, but it was full of helicopter landing pads and had a big red cross on the side, and it had complete setup for surgery and saving lives. And many of my troops were flown out there, but once they got into that system, I had no more contact with them. It's hard to find out what happened to them. Finally, I start seeing houses looking down on Da Nang. That's picture number 5. And we hit the tarmac, and we're sailing along at whatever landing speed is. And in the background, you can see hills, which means I'm looking from the runway, which is oriented north-south. It means I'm looking west. And passing sandbagged bunkers with fighter jets inside. There were also a lot of helicopters. There were a lot of big cargo planes, the Hercules, the C-130s, and all very busy. It was like O'Hare. It was just a lot of traffic in and out. Finally, they opened the door. At this point, all of us are dead quiet, and we walk out the door to take the stairs down to the ground, and I could swear it was almost impossible to avoid the urge to duck. When you stepped off the plane, you started crouching and looking for cover. And I'm looking down at the guys with the big Mickey Mouse ear muffs on, just minding their business, not paying any attention. I'm thinking, this is a war. What are you guys doing? Wandering around like nothing's going to happen. They could rocket this place any minute. And I looked at some of my classmates, and they're all equally cautious about the whole thing. And it was embarrassing, and at the same time, it was funny, you know, and we all started comparing notes. One of my closer friends, Bob Bowman, is, with his little butter bar on his hat, is turning around to say something about the fact that, well, I don't hear any popping sounds, you know, and nobody's making popcorn. That always scared us. This is Jim Collins. He's walking past a truck. They had vehicles lined up to take us to various places. Apparently they had made some decisions. This is picture number 10. They had made some decisions about some of us, and there were vehicles waiting to take us to some headquarters. That's the back end of Bob walking away. And here's yours truly, Second Lieutenant Paul Barker, trying my best to look unfazed by stepping into this war. And you can see why the troops sometimes refer to them as puppy lieutenants, you know. We all seem so fresh-faced. I was 23 at the time. No, I was 22. I had my birthday out in the field. Wow. And somebody brought me a can of sea rations with a birthday candle stuck in it. It was very nice. These are 3 more classmates. There's my future home back there against those hills.
Yeah.
It's so hard to see in the haze, of course. This guy is hard to make out, but for a second lieutenant, he's behaving most moronically. He's shooting the finger at the camera and grinning like a Cheshire cat. His name is Gene Armstead, and people who study Civil War history might recognize his name. General Louis Armstead, his great-great-great-great-grandfather, was the peak of Pickett's charge And so the high water mark of the Confederacy after Pickett's charge failed is counted as the spot where Gene's great-great-great-grandfather died, stepped up to a cannon, capturing a federal cannon, and he was turned into Swiss cheese. Didn't die for several hours, but it makes a good scene in the movie Gettysburg. And the guy doesn't look like Gene's grandfather at all. But it's funny when I look at a picture of Louis Armstead and Gene Armstead, the only difference, they both have a head shaped like a potato with balding dark hair on his ancestor and balding blonde hair on Gene, who's in it 22, 23, I don't know. He and Craig McClellan, a great-great-grandson of General McClellan, were constantly refighting the war at lunch, you know, complaining about each other. It was a riot to listen to.
Do you mean the Civil War or the more recent war?
They're refighting the Civil War, and everybody is complaining about General McClellan, that he did nothing and he was a bane on the White House, you know. They couldn't get him moving. And General McClellan was like unusually short, had baby-like skin, had a high, squeaky Donald Duck sort of voice, and just looked like a kid, but he was a perfectionist, and he never wanted to use up his beautiful army by sending them into combat where they could get shot and get dirty. And it really created a problem for Lincoln. Meanwhile, out west, Ulysses Grant, who was always dirty and poorly shaven and chomping on cigars, is winning battles left and right because he understands the nature of the beast, you know. So Craig McClellan also had a somewhat high-pitched voice, was small, and had baby skin. It was amazing to compare these two guys to their ancestors. Okay, so we get assigned to go to different places. And in my case, I got into a Jeep with one other officer behind me and a driver who was taking us to 1st Marine Regiment headquarters. And as we're driving through town, I'm looking at the Da Nang architecture. It looks surprisingly European. This is number 14. Yeah, this is 15. And there is Asian influence. You do see some pagodas and shrines, but you also see a lot of construction that is reminiscent of France, in particular Normandy, where I spent some time years before. Traffic was not particularly great on the street, but there were a lot of pedestrians. There were a lot of ad hoc markets that popped up. This is picture number 18. But off to one side, inside of that ring of trash I mentioned, were bunkers whose sandbags had rotted in the sun over the years, which tells me they were burlap sandbags, whereas what we had was polyethylene. And it didn't rot, and it's kept its green color. The burlap bags were brown. Later they issued them in olive drab color, but they were still burlap. They deteriorated, and the sand began to leak out, and you notice it's very white sand. So it's clear they brought it in from the beach. But these are pretty old-fashioned bunkers in their design. And I thought that they were interesting because they were so different to what we were building in the modern times. It's the same shot. And I noticed that in many places where you looked around the horizon, there was something burning. And I thought, well, it's a war. I got to expect something to be on fire. This was probably a trash fire. There were days when nothing happened. You know, somebody stumbled on a mine or something. The kids, this is maybe a 4-year-old kid. The kids all spoke impeccable English. And I'm thinking it's because they were at that point in their life where they're learning languages. And they pick up that second one easily. They're not just savvy in terms of the language, but the culture as well. And they're always walking up to us, making the most astonishing statements. They were so precocious. This guy is trying to thumb a ride. He's got his thumb up, and he's asking us to stop and pick him up. And when I had my perimeter set up on a hill next to a village at one point in that big valley west of Da Nang, a little kid came up to me. It didn't look like he was old enough to talk, and he said, "Hey, GI, you got cigarette?" And I said, "Cigarette? Do you smoke?" He said, "Yeah, I want cigarette." I said, "You shouldn't be smoking at your age." And he said, "You give me a cigarette." And I said, "No, I'm not going to give you a cigarette. Get out of here." And he looked at me and he says, "Screw you, it's my country." And he walks off. I don't know how they got that, but the other thing I noticed a lot when I was in town is the Vietnamese women have this national dress, formal dress called an áo dài, which, to give you an example of the difference in pronunciation between North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese, in North Vietnam it's pronounced áo dài. And so the two cannot talk to each other very easily, and that creates a problem which will show up in my platoon later on. But here are two ladies who were being coy and flirting at us. And flirting is a national pastime in Vietnamese culture. And that's why they hated the Russians so much after the war. When the Russians came in, they didn't know how to flirt. They didn't know how to have a good time. They just wanted to get drunk and pass out. And they stayed with their own kind, and they said, in America, they got rock and roll, they got blue jeans, and they love our women. You know? They were very proud of that. But I got to say, mixing French and Vietnamese produces some beautiful people, male and female. You know, they're just elegant, I thought. Here's a busy intersection, which I actually got to see 20 years later when they switched from a traffic cop to a stoplight. And it was a big progress. Finally, I arrive at the destination. This thing on the hill is called Freedom Hill. It's the headquarters for the 1st Regiment of the 1st Division. And I get there and get a presentation in an amphitheater on what's going on with the war now. And then I get assigned to my unit, which is going to be 3rd Battalion of the 1st Marine Regiment of the 1st Marine Division. And the short name for 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines is 3-1. I don't know if the cantonment, as they called it, actually had a name, like Camp something or other. They usually do, but for some reason, I never learned that. Or I never heard it. It didn't have it as a sign over the entrance. Usually all signs in the Marine Corps are red with yellow type. So this next chapter is called...
Before we go on to the next chapter, can I just ask you, like, was it unusual that you had a camera? Did most of the soldiers bring cameras? Was it because your interest in art drew you to photography?
I don't remember ever seeing anybody else with a camera. But the problem is that, one, I was a bad photographer, and two, photography was not very advanced for the non-professional at that point in history in 1970. And three, when you got a really tough job to do, if you're going out into combat, you don't bring a camera, you know. So I've got a few pictures out in the field, but they don't show fighting. They don't show explosions. They don't show smoke. And so there are not going to be any blood-curdling or exciting photographs, unfortunately. The pictures in the field looks like a bunch of scruffy guys on a camping trip. And it's very unglamorous. And that's, most of combat is absolute boredom. And then you have moments, as the pilots used to say in World War II, moments of extreme terror, interrupted by hours of pathological boredom.
Well,
so
that's part of it too. Yeah.
When you drive into 3-1, it's next to an army camp on one side and some kind of South Vietnamese unit on the other side. There's barbed wire fences everywhere. You can't tell what's what, where the borders are from one camp to the other, and you drive through several gates that are all security, and they stop you and check who you are. very unimpressive way to arrive at my new home. So I thought it would be better to introduce it via helicopters. Many times I was coming back from an operation or from, it needed to be pulled in just by myself for medical reasons or administrative reasons. And that gave me the opportunity to use the camera. So here on picture number 20 is part of an Army base that was near to the 3-1 cantonment, and that pile of obscure buildings in the back is 3-1. And going to be my new home. 26, okay. This is a .50 caliber machine gun sticking out the side of a CH-46, looking down on part of, about half of the 3-1 cantonment. Notice a tiny little gray speck up here on the ridge.
Yeah.
That is a lookout tower. On this ridge, which theoretically semi-surrounds us, you need to have bunkers along the top of the ridge to act as what would be picket lines in the Civil War, widely spread people, to alert you if anything is coming your way. And the call signs for those different bunkers were Satan 1, Satan 2, Satan 3. I believe this watchtower was at Satan 3, but it'll occur in other photographs, and I used to use it as a way to orient myself. If you fell asleep when you got on the helicopter because you haven't slept in several days, you wake up and wonder where the heck you are, and you're coming into land, and you're wondering, is this a short stop or is this home? And so that little guard tower was useful. Let's see. There's the LZ. It's gray rubber matting trying to keep the dust down. And it's got big white letters. It says LZ 460, I think, along the bottom there. And
Do you want to explain what the LC is?
landing zone. Thank you. The same LZ occurs in this photograph, but it's taken from that watchtower, shooting down on the base. So we were flying in like this, about to land on that gray rubber. And this now, at some point, my platoon is assigned to the Satans. So we're protecting the backside of the cantonment from anything that might be coming up the far side of the mountain.
Oh, okay.
And each of these places I could explain, but it gets to be too confusing. Infantry hooches. Hooches are tin roof plywood buildings where the infantry guys sleep when they're in the rear. Office hooches. And when I got promoted out of being a platoon commander into being an executive officer, I use the word in quotation marks because I would much rather have stayed with my platoon. But I'm flying a desk and I've got 2 clerk typists to command as opposed to 55 guys out in the boonies, you know. But that gives you an idea of the size of the base camp. And when you get down inside of it, here's one of the most critical places inside 3-1 cantonment, the shower house. Everybody's friend. When you come out of the field, a warm shower, especially if you've been up at Haibon Pass freezing your buns off, you know, for a couple of weeks. A warm shower was, they used to say, this is better than sex. I would take issue with that, but warm water was like bring people back to life after a little exposure. That's the mess hall on the top. Now, I went back to Vietnam 20 years after the war with a veterans group called the Vietnam Veterans Restoration Program. Built a clinic, traveled, and I went and found my base. All of the eucalyptus trees were gone. All of the roads had eroded really deeply. All of the buildings were gone. Everything was stripped. Everything was recycled. It was like there was no evidence that there had ever been a base camp there. There were Buddhist graves on the ridge where my office hooch had been. And there were cattle roaming all around. There were 2 kinds of cows in Vietnam. Con Trao are the ones with the scimitar horns, water buffaloes.
Oh.
But then there's the Indian sacred cow, which are called bo. And they have little short stumpy horns and sometimes a hump on their back. And they come in pastel colors. Water buffaloes are uniformly dark gray. And they're almost always covered with mud because, like pigs, they don't sweat. They need the wet mud to keep their temperature regulated. Those are the hooches where the infantry lived. So one of those hooches was for 3rd Platoon, which I was put in command of. Thank you. Now, unfortunately, we switched to black and white. There's the backside of the shower house. And here are the office buildings I was talking about. My office was at the end. It had a banana tree planted in front of it. It might have been plantains. I'm not sure I can tell the difference between the two plants. But here's a closer shot with the office hooch with a little window that says business window. People would walk up to it to ask questions. There's the banana tree. It never produced bananas the whole time I was there. I was really looking forward to that. And there's a Jeep parked in dead center of the picture with another one over here next to a little bridge over an erosion cut. And next to that Jeep, at a closer range, is a strange mobile platform with big balloon tires, a motor underneath this aluminum frame, like 4x8 sheet with little rails along it, called a mule. And it did exactly what mules do in previous war. It hauled ammunition and water. And it had a flip-up seat with a flip-up steering wheel and 2 pedals that you'd put your foot on, and they'd drive them around these fire bases. You could carry a dozen of them in a helicopter or slung on the bottom of a helicopter. They were really handy, and I've only seen 2 or 3 that survived. None of them seemed to be operational, but it seems to me they'd be useful in camps or something, Boy Scout camps or something.
Yeah.
They were, I thought, a great invention. So I was sorry not to see them proliferate. There is the backside of the mess hall, and there, looking straight north, is that ridge of mountains. And right where that smudge is in the picture is pointing at Haivon Pass. So my first big mission is to go up Haivon Pass in trucks, get out, go inside the old French castle, which is up there as a defensive place. This big brick monstrosity. I'll show you a picture shortly. And then climb this ridge up to this point, stop just short of 1192. It's called that because its altitude on the contour interval lines of the map marks it as the peak and identifies it as 1,192 meters tall. So in military parlance, that's the name of the mountain, 1192, which means about 3,000 feet, but half of that is taken care of by the fact that we drove to get to the pass. And then we climbed for 8 hours up into the clouds, and it was an eerie place.
Was the route going there also dangerous? Like
on this side, it was not. On the opposite side of the pass, it was, because there were clear fields of fire all along the ridge where the North Vietnamese and mostly the NVA, Viet Cong had been knocked out during the Tet Offensive 2 years before, and they showed who they were because they had been a secret organization up to that point, and they got decimated. And then they got screwed over royally by the North Vietnamese when they won the war. They didn't give them the pensions they had promised. They didn't give them the respect they deserved. And here I am feeling sorry for the Viet Cong, the guys who were not very polite to us. But the North Vietnamese would get along the top of that ridge and fire down on the road with rocket-propelled grenades. And they could close down the pass without half trying. So many other platoons had gone up that ridge before me, and I found pictures from those adventures, which I could bring at some point. Okay, to get back to the camp, this is the Combat Operations Center. As I was saying, most signs in the Marine Corps are red with yellow writing. It's supposed to be red and gold. And it's bristling with antenna because it's all communication. So this is the nerve center. It takes all the radio communication incoming and outgoing. And it's right down the hill from the commanding officer's hooch. Now, if you go up to the top of the ridge and back, the very highest of the Satans, Satan 1, I guess, had a little landing zone on the top, so we wouldn't have to climb all the way down. But still, every day I would allow one trooper to take the path down to the Geedunk, which is a Navy term for a place where you can get candy. And they'd come back with Playboy magazines and mail and candy and cigarettes, and then distribute along the line of Satan bunkers. But this does demonstrate the white sand I was talking about later.
Yeah.
That's why it looks so bright on that three-dimensional map. It was brilliant in sunlight. And here is that from the same position, turning a little bit to the left, that is to the north, is more of the white sand, the Champ-Coudet River. Way back in here, there's a little gray spot you can just make out. That's the railroad bridge at Kempville called, I'll remember the name in a minute. Anyway, it was an important bridge. I wound up protecting that for a couple of weeks at a time. And there's Haibon Pass in the distance.
Yeah.
And here it is. There's the bridge with an old French watchtower in the back at one end of it.
Was the sand made out of, was it from limestone?
That's a good question. It was identical to the sand that I grew up with along the Gulf Coast, Alabama, Biloxi, Fort Morgan, this Gulf Shores, this whole area. Same sand dunes, same sea oats as on the other side in the Pacific. And when you get into the hills upon which the Satans are placed, the brush and the color of the dirt was identical to Los Angeles and the stuff you see on the west coast of the Pacific. Same manzanita plants, same kind of scruffy, dry scrub. It just surprised me that there were so many similarities. And then eucalyptus trees, that's from Australia. And it's just, the world got a little smaller. Okay, now I'm going to cover the neighborhood, meaning what's around the 3-1 cantonment. Here is one of the villages, the one whose name I can't remember. That's the Catholic Church for the village. That meant that if it was a Catholic village, it was probably safe because they were violently opposed to communism. And they had nuns and priests who were all Vietnamese that had gone to Rome. And this is a Gothic church that is maybe bigger than the village it's in. There's a decent picture of it. We're at number 41. Let me just check. Yeah. Okay. So I was always happy to see that cathedral if we had a patrol route to go through because I figured I was going into safe territory. Some of the other villages were a little more dicey. And I found, to my surprise, that they could be bribed into making us safe. At some point when they couldn't get us water for about a week, and we were pretty far from the base camp, we wound up drinking out of the clearest, fast-running streams we could find, but we all got internal parasites. So they told us to just stay put. They dropped a net full of food, mostly canned goods, stuff we'd never see except in the rear in a mess hall. Scrambled eggs and bacon all mixed together, spaghetti and meatballs, these big number 10 cans. And we couldn't eat it all, but after a week, we had been taking medication and the parasites were gone. So I realized that was going to happen ahead of time, so I asked the village chief to come talk to us and said, if we don't get any sniper fire for the next week, all that's left goes to you. We'll bring it down to the village for you. No problem. We had our prick ones, they called them, radios, private radios playing rock music, and troops were dancing, and we were having a picnic for a week, you know. It was great. This is the castle at Haibon Pass. It's part of a more complex arrangement, but it's on one side of the road. It's brick, and it really smells inside, but Dai Huy Top, Captain Top, the local South Vietnamese commander, gave us one of his platoons and my platoon, and we were going to go up to the top of the ridge. I knew we were in trouble when we got to South Vietnamese troops, because they were notorious for avoiding any kind of confrontation. So while we were sneaking for 8 hours on hands and knees, climbing up these rocks, they're what we refer to as diddy-bopping up the hill and accidentally setting off their weapons, and accidentally, you know, calling out loud, just letting the enemy know, back up, we're coming, just back up, nobody will get hurt. So we didn't surprise anybody, surprisingly. Okay. You know what? Okay. Not only is my vision going, but my handwriting is going because of the tremor. And so I can't read my own writing sometimes. These are pictures of bases around us. I just thought that one was kind of colorful.
That's cool. Yeah.
There were fire bases scattered everywhere, and they all had Gunji names. And I was a pay officer at one point, where I flew around in a Huey with a box full of cash in military payment certificates. I had like $40,000.
Yeah.
And I was paying it out to the troops at different, you know,
Location.
pay the troops 5 minutes later, get back in the helicopter, go to the next fire base. And the thing about fire bases is I always felt that they were like a scar on the landscape. It was like a dirt and sandbag slum hit by a tornado, you know. There's no military policing up or organization. Okay, we're 3. I'll have to check these for order when we're done. Radio man smoking a cigar, who looks like might be 18 years old if he's lucky. I saw a lot of cigars. It was a riot. The affectations that the troops take on, and I'm one to talk because I posed for Gunji pictures myself. But it was always entertaining when I would say, Lance Corporal so-and-so, take my camera and just get some pictures of the guys. And immediately the guys would go into their Rambo poses, you know. This is one of the observation posts I stopped to pay. It had a picture of somebody's bulldog attached to the sign. They had named themselves O.P. Goodwin, and someone told me that Goodwin was the name of the dog. And it says R&R Center. R&R was rest and recuperation, but we used to use another term with retaliation in it. I can't remember exactly what it was. An R&R Center was a vacation, you know, and that was such a scenic spot. I brought this picture because it shows this guy with a big bandage on his back going into a tent. And it indicated to me that you could be wounded, maybe even seriously wounded, but put back into combat if you had a critical job. If you were a communication specialist or a linguist specialist, and the needs of the Marine Corps meant you didn't get a pass just because you got shot. So you'd be patched up and sent back out there.
Wow. Was the picture of the radio operator the one that you referred to in the previous interview, I think by the name of Bouncing Denny or something? Let's see.
Bouncing Denny. There was a Lance Corporal Blackman, who was the fastest human speaker I've ever run across. He was my radio man until he stood up on the skyline at night against the glow of Da Nang and got himself sniped. And his replacement is in these pictures. In fact, he's in the pictures later. I seem to have gotten some things out of order. I need to drop back to Haibon Pass. Across the road from the French castle was a mom and pop shop, what they used to call it was like a grocery, and it was a 7-Eleven in Vietnamese culture, with a little Buddhist shrine. This picture was taken in '72 when I went back with the Veterans Group. This big billboard wasn't there during the war. The trail we took to get to the top was just off to the side of that little pagoda shrine. Here is the same place, almost in the same footprints, after the clouds came through. And that's not as bad as it got. It really got to be a pea souper. The little shrine is there, so I walked up to get a better picture of the shrine closer up. But you can see it's pretty foggy when the clouds are determined to come through. Now, I pointed out O.P. Reno on the three-dimensional map. And coming in from the west on this map, coming in at an angle like this, I don't know what the helicopter was doing over here because we didn't mess with this area at all, but he must have been making a big curve. He's coming in to land at O.P. Reno there. So you're seeing it from a northwesterly direction. And it's the clever engineers with the Army brought their bulldozers. They can helicopter drop them on top of a hill and flattened off a low part and a high part. And on the high part, here, as we're coming in, they pop smoke. It's a yellow smoke. There's no reason for them to pop smoke, except that people like doing it because it's like fireworks. Puts out a whole lot of smoke for a long time. And the colors were brilliant. And, red, green, yellow, blue, all the primary colors. When they had a counterintelligence team from the Navy, they were equipped to the teeth. They had derringers in their socks. They were just ridiculous. And they had mini smoke grenades. They look like a film canister. You'd take a wick out of the lid, scratch them on some sandpaper inside the rim of the thing, and it would start it burning. And they had purple, and they had like turquoise and orange, and so they were really different, and they were proud of their gear, but they were also a problem. I'll get to that later. So they're popping smoke for no reason. Normally, if you're invisible to a helicopter pilot and you're calling in a medevac, when you say, okay, we're at these coordinates, he can be right on top of you and not be able to see you because we're all camouflaged, right?
Right.
We're all the same color as the dirt in the landscape. So we'd say we're popping smoke, and we'd throw a grenade out in the road or in a field or something, and this red smoke would billow up. And they would say, okay, I got your red, meaning if the enemy pops smoke, and they have all the same stuff we do because they've been stealing it.
Yeah.
If I say I'm popping red smoke, they'll pull out a red smoke and pop it somewhere to attract the helicopter over so they can shoot him up. So he identifies the color. And that way, if there's two smokes, if they pop a yellow and I pop a red, I'd say I'm the red smoke. And now we know where the yellow smoke is, right? So there was a little trickery going on there. Once we landed from the landing zone, looking up, I see all these antennas, all this communication happening from this hill, and this strange little cupola sort of thing on the top. Now, I don't know how I must have been there twice because some of these pictures are in color. There's the cupola, and in back of the guy carrying the clipboard, just over his shoulder, you see a dark shape inside under the lid. It's a laser rangefinder. And at this point in 1970, I thought lasers were sci-fi. I didn't know they were actually in existence. But this thing, today it would probably be big enough to fit in your hand, but it looks like an old television camera from the 60s. It's this giant box on a swivel with, things you look through. And this is the man who operated it. I think he was a warrant officer. But he was the technician, and he's about to look through the eyepieces. He could ping a red laser off of something, and he had a 360-degree view all around the valley from O.P. Reno. He could bounce a laser light off of it and get exact coordinates. And an artillery unit, who you cannot hear, cannot see, it's somewhere behind a ridge somewhere, can fire one shot and destroy the thing on the first try. He can hit exactly where they're so well coordinated, exactly where the laser pointed. And later they came out with laser bombs and laser guided missiles, and I was very impressed.
Was this probably one of the first applied uses of laser in military?
It must have been. It was certainly the first I knew of.
Yeah.
They also had seismic devices, earthquake sensors, except that they were so sensitive they could pick up footsteps. They would fly along a helicopter on what they saw was a trail. They'd fly low with the helicopter and drop these things that looked like upside-down rockets. They were painted camouflage. They would hit the ground. The jolt would cause an antenna to rise up out of the back end of the thing, and the antenna had branches that made it look like a stick. and it had a camouflage parachute that was made up of triangles and designed so that it would spin.
Wow.
And give the thing greater force, I guess, when it hit. The antenna would come out and it would turn itself on, and somewhere in a hooch, miles away, they start monitoring, listening for footsteps going past this thing. My troops would see them and say, "Hey, there's another one of those funny devices." They'd pick them up, turn them upside down, and acid would burn through the thing to destroy it so that the enemy couldn't put it to any use.
Yes.
So even if you just tapped them, you'd hear shh, and smoke would start coming out through little screw holes. And there would be another $3,000 in taxpayers' dollars. I don't know. I really had to prevent them. They tried to buy me off by giving me the parachute. Okay, so this next chapter is called Meet the Troopies. This is my platoon outside of one of their hooches doing an assembly. They were actually in 3 ranks, but I think this is the squad leaders off to the side. They're having a conference about something. There's another picture of the same. And what they look like out in the field, if everything was safe and we had a perimeter set up around us, then things could get very casual. You'll notice no helmets, no flak jackets. It's hot. So everybody is stripped down. They're playing cards while another squad is coming in from having spent the night in an ambush site or just had a patrol route that had certain points they had to radio from. Often I knew they were sandbagging the patrols. In other words, I'd tell them, okay, go out and hit these grid coordinates, this point, this village, this bridge, this trail intersection, and back to us. They would go off out of sight. Everybody'd lay down, go to sleep, except the radio man, who would say, "Okay, we're at coordinates such and such, checking in." And then they'd wait an appropriate amount of time, call in the next one. And that was fine by me, as long as there was nothing serious going on. And the platoon sergeant knew it. And if he was cool with it, he was a far more experienced guy than myself, then I was okay with it too. The radio man is carrying an upside-down parachute. Because it's white, it tells me it's a flare parachute from an artillery round where the rounds burst at a certain altitude. And these brilliant, blinding flares come down, light up the countryside, and they're hanging on a parachute, so they're descending slowly. The problem with using
so the parachutes
flares,
are for the flares.
Yeah, the parachute keeps the flare up in the sky. The problem is, once it pops out of its shell, there's the parachute has to deploy, and it results in the flare spinning like this as it comes down. The spin gradually diminishes, but the initial impression is you look out on the landscape from your fighting hole or where you're hiding behind a tree, and when the flare goes off, you can't look at it, or you screw up your night vision for half an hour or so. So you block your view of the flare, and you look at the countryside, and because of the spin, all the shadows are swimming like this. And you start getting seasick, and it's like being in another world.
Wow.
All of a sudden, it's like the sun is moving, But it's black shadows at night and brilliant daylit flare light. I didn't like using them, frankly, even if I could hear sounds in front of me. I'd just as soon do without the flares, Try. One of the tricks we learned was to look at where you think the motion is happening, and then look to the side. And you'd be using your side vision, paying attention to that because it's less burned out. So
then
pick
looking
up
forward,
things
then
moving.
looking.
Yeah, if you got a sensation of movement using the outer edges of your eye, the far limits of your perception, you could pick up movement much better than if you look straight at it.
Oh.
And yeah, it was a useful trick. Here is my platoon sergeant, R.L. McCausland. I never found out what the R.L. stands for. He might have been Ron, he might have been Richard, I don't know. But to everybody, he was Sergeant Mack. Second tour, so really knew his stuff. And because I had commanded a platoon on Okinawa, I knew how it really works, that lieutenant gets the blame when something goes wrong, and sometimes the glory, but he's just the figurehead. The guy who really runs the show is the platoon sergeant, and he's more knowledgeable, generally older, and he was the old man at 24. I was 23, but it really mattered back then.
Yeah.
And he really knew his stuff. He was practical, grounded, just an interesting individual, you know. And to get to raise to the platoon sergeant level, you have to be someone very trustworthy. Okay, here's where I gave out my box camera to the troops, and I said, just go take pictures of each other and give it back to me.
Oh, cool.
And they're all goofing off or doing something silly, or trying to make themselves look gungy. We're up to picture, this one is number 64. This is Lance Corporal Blackman, my radio man, in back of Sergeant Mack. And this is a couple of days before a sniper sent him to the rear. He was okay. He got hit in the cheek because the round hit his radio and fragmented. But we medevaced him anyway, and he was very unpopular because he was such a smart aleck. And so the platoon sergeant said, we're going to make a judgment call here. We can get another radio man. And once he stood up against the skyline in what we called sniper's delight and get shot, I'm thinking, yeah, maybe he's not paying close attention to the limits of his, in immortality. This is me in my home away from home. It's a poncho, waterproof poncho held up on sticks and branches, and underneath it is a poncho liner, a camouflaged sort of nylon blanket that we had. The Roman army had their big red capes that they slept in, and the Confederates and the Union had blanket rolls over the shoulder. I think into World War I, you were still seeing that with Europeans. And we had our blankie. It was a poncho liner. I still, in summer, I still use one on the bed because it's very lightweight and dries out in a heartbeat after a rain. There's a CH-46 helicopter, and that is the infamous counterintelligence team of 5 Navy three American Navy guys and 2 South Vietnamese guys. They had intelligence as to where the local VC headquarters was, and I was assigned to protect them and be their muscle. They would call the shots on where we're going and what we're doing. But it was clear to me that they were hoping to capture troops, and in an unguarded moment I said, what do you do once you got enemy captured? You take them to the rear for questioning? And he said, no, I question them out in the field. And I said, well, how do are you an interrogator? He said, yeah. He said, and I don't need any electrical generators hooked up to their genitalia. I've got my fingers, and that's all I need. And I said, well, I've got the Geneva Convention, and I'm sworn to uphold it. And he said, well, look, you're in a real war now, I'm not going to have any shaved-tail lieutenant telling me what to do. He was a warrant officer, which is kind of a weird hybrid between officer and enlisted. So it came down to it. I said, you got 5 guys. I got 55 guys. Push comes to shove, you're going to be in a bad way. Don't want you torturing anybody. Once you're out of my jurisdiction, there's not much I can do about it. We didn't capture anybody. We did find what we thought was a grave, and when his own troops the warrant officer who was in charge of the counterintelligence teams, when his troops sort of demurred from digging up the grave to see who was under there, he pushed them aside and says, "Get out of here, you weenies. Let me show you how this is done." Started digging with his hands, and then all of a sudden he gets an ugly look on his face, and he goes, "Oh my God." He smells his hand, and he says, "It's a latrine."
Oh.
That went around the platoon real fast. Hey, that jerk from the Navy just dug up a latrine.
Yeah.
And we found the VC headquarters. It amounted to a flattened out spot in the weeds with a couple of bags of rice and a little red flag that had in Vietnamese was some kind of congratulations for rigging up explosive devices. It wasn't the headquarters. The Viet Cong didn't have headquarters. They were so mobile. Yeah. They were so loosely organized. And I said, "Where do you come up with these terms?" I said, "That's a European Army term, you know.
Yeah.
We're fighting an insurgency here." Well, even these weren't insurgents; they were locals, you know, who considered themselves patriots, and they were fighting a guerrilla war against us. They didn't need a headquarters. So the whole thing was very disappointing. I was really glad when they got back on the helicopter and left, because as long as they got us into a firefight, you know.
How did
and that was the one where I lifted out of my body.
Yes.
When they called me by name. And I still blame that warrant officer for, you know, we had a good thing going. The enemy would wake up at night and move around during the night. We'd set in, make a little noise so they knew where we were. They would avoid us, and then we'd move around during the day. They would go to sleep, and at dawn and dusk, the flies and the mosquitoes changed places. It was like punching the clock at a factory, you know. And the deal was, we all go home alive, right? You know, shift change. Okay, you guys are up. You know, don't shoot us. We're sitting over here in an ambush, clearing our throats and you know, knocking things over, and so you know where we are. So don't come around here. We have to shoot you. But we would still bump into each other once in a while and feel obliged to fight it out. But my first reaction to combat was to jump up out of the hole and say, "Stop it! This is stupid. You don't know me. I don't know you. Yeah. What are you shooting at me for?" You know, I mean, it's such a weird experience to have people actively trying to kill you. And there's no good reason. I mean, there's no personal reason, you know. It's
but for a while there was, like you're saying, the Cold War, the shift work.
Yeah, and that was because they all knew that Nixon was going to pull the 1st Marine Division out. Was it 1st Marine Regiment? No, it was 1st Marine Division, and leave in some of the air units.
I see.
And support units. So we were just marking time until he did, and he did, and it actually shortened up my tour by 4 days, I think. But you know, I'll take the 4 days.
Why not?
Here's another guy shooting the finger, and that is very common. You see a camera, you put up your middle finger. I don't know why. This is Apollonia. That was my weatherman, my radio man who replaced Blackman. Here's crossing rice paddy dikes. You stay on the dike. This side is just wet mud.
Oh.
This side is growing plants. So that's just about to be harvested.
Wow.
And when they harvest it, they'll break the dike and flood this area. So first they have to plant that, then they have to harvest these things. And then they start the cycle all over again. This guy is a former North Vietnamese soldier. This is the enemy. His name was Henry, and I never found out his Vietnamese name. But he went by Henry and he spelled it Henri, because it's French.
Yeah.
And he's sitting on a 46, just minding his own business. He was an interesting kid. I talked to him quite a bit. His North Vietnamese accent was so thick that the South Vietnamese couldn't understand him at all. So I wound up being a translator between him and the village chief. I think what he's saying is, you know, what's the word for canned goods, you know? And I don't know, he was a nice kid, though.
Where had you learned Vietnamese, and was it Southern or Northern that you learned to learn?
It was all Southern. It was high-intensity language training at Quantico. It was after basic school when I got out. It's how I got to be friends with Bob Bowman. He was married, so he raided an on-base housing unit with a second bedroom. his wife's poodle had his leg run over and was patched up. So he said, you pay for the poodle leg and you got free room and board at our place. Both of us were in high intensity language training, so we both studied Vietnamese. He was pretty good, but the teacher was from Kansas City. He had never been to Vietnam, and he didn't know the most basic stuff about the language. He had a textbook to use, you know. And the thing about Vietnamese is you don't speak it, you sing it. It's a tonal language like Chinese. So the example I always use is if you jump into a xích and say, take me to the cathedral, you'd be using the word nhà tờ for cathedral. But if you say nhà tờ, it's a house of prostitution. And you get yourself into a big difference. It was one of the more glaring ones. But I found when I got back from the war and I still had a lot of the language, that I would try it in Vietnamese restaurants. And the waitress would just look at me like, what was that? And I'd say, Chào cô đẹp, chúng tôi muốn something. And she'd kind of back away and go into the kitchen and get a couple of other people and say, and come out as if to say, let's see if you'll do it again. I had no idea what I was saying. I finally found out you got to sing it, you know, you can't speak it. And I had more luck after that, but not during the war. On the return trip in '92, I found I could really communicate with cattle, you know.
With the cattle?
I'd say, Xin lỗi, đi đi mau. And excuse me, get out of the way. And they're going, ooh, you know. So here is a picture of Henry sitting in a fire base somewhere, facing outboard, probably saying his Buddhist rosary. Now, this is a former North Vietnamese assailant, you know, and this is the enemy. And he, Chu Hoi was the name of the program, Open Arms, for surrendering to the South so he could get some rice, some medical attention, a pair of boots, and a little piece of land. He had been in the jungle for 2 years. He was sick the whole time, underfed, got no mail, had no idea if his father was still alive, and it was considered a hero in the family. And we used to talk about the difference between the Marine Corps and the North Vietnamese Army, what basic training was like, what boot camp was like. It was radically different, for widely different practices. You know, when they graduated, their drill instructor gave each of them a chrysanthemum. Mm-hmm. Quite different than the way the Marine Corps does. And I said, what do you think of the Marines? He said, I think that they are a dictatorship. I said, well, of course. No. We vote in the North Vietnamese Army. The political cadre has to agree with the military cadre, and then they go out and do whatever they've agreed to do. But it's a democracy. There were a lot of surprises for me. One day walking up the road, I took a picture of the platoon. This is when my numbers were up, thanks to having artillery forward observers and the counterintelligence team and other attachments. I was up to 55, and that is a line of spaced guys far enough apart that a mortar round will only get one and not two. And it goes off into the hazy, humid air, so you can't see the point man. And if I turn around backwards, there's another line of troops going behind me, you know, off into the distance. And there's a rear-end Charlie who turns around every few steps and faces to the rear to make sure nothing's coming up behind us. And whenever we made a stop, each guy would look at the guy in front of him and see which way he was facing. He'd face outboard, just in case there was anybody lined up along one side. You never have an ambush on both sides, because that's like setting up a circular firing squad. You'll wind up shooting each other. So ambushes only come in a straight one line, shooting one direction, or an L-shaped ambush, where the bottom part of the L has to be really careful not to swing their weapons to the left, because they'll start shooting their own guys. So L-shaped ambushes take some coordinating. But this guy is facing outboard, and he's checked to see the other guy is facing outboard in the other direction. So he faces right, the next guy faces left, the next one right, next one left. And that way, if anything pops up, half the platoon is already facing the right direction. Can return fire.
I see.
And here's a couple of shell craters that further up the road, reflecting in with the sky. These are small, so this is probably artillery 155 or 105s. I'll show you the big craters in a little bit. One of my troopers being dashing really wanted a copy of that to send to his girlfriend. And he says, "You got to admit I'm handsome, right, Lieutenant?" Said, "You'd look better if you had a weapon strung across." He says, "No, man, I'm into peace." The hippie influence was very strong. Most of my classmates of officers had formerly been hippies. And we all got haircuts before we went into the Marine Corps.
Do you think it's because of the timing of when you were in Vietnam, like 1970 versus, I don't know, 1967 or something?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Normal American kids were happening in the first 4 or 5 years of the war. By the end of the war, it was all draftees. Most of mine were court referrals where the judge said, "You're in trouble, you can either go to a home for wayward youth or you can join the Marines. Take your pick." And it was all for petty stuff, you know. But again, many of them had never been off the block. They'd never been 2 streets from where they were born in Detroit. And they find themselves in a foreign land with a foreign language where they know all the locals are talking about them, you know, where the men hold hands with each other if they're friends. That freaked him out totally. Where if you want to talk to a village chief or an older person, you have to be very deferential to the fact that they're older than you. You have to learn to squat down until your knees are ready to break, you know, and put your knees in your armpits. And you always face side by side, never directly opposite each other. That's confrontational. You face the same direction. And while you're talking, you pick up some dirt and put it in your mouth just to test the soil, because every good farmer knows what good dirt tastes like, and it's like an agreed upon thing. Hey, let's say dirt's pretty good here, you know, we could grow rice here. And
It's like a basic courtesy kind
right,
of.
and after you've been talking for a while, the village chief will put his hand on your knee and leave it there. And for the troops, that was like, "Lieutenant, what is he doing? What does this mean? Are we engaged or what?" You know? So I had to do acculturation classes, you know. It was often pretty weird. So this is a chapter is dedicated to one of my most favorite things in the world, the CH-46 double rotor helicopter. It's a cargo helicopter, smaller than the Army's Chinook, which it gets mistaken for periodically. The way you can tell the difference is the CH-46 has little hips for the 2 back wheels and 1 wheel in the front. The Chinook has a gas tank that runs the whole length of it. And if you had them side by side, the Chinook has a square body. This has a round body, like a tube.
Yeah.
The other one is like a shoebox. It's considerably bigger. It can fit a lot more. It can travel further because it's got extra gas on it. So it's a heavy hauler. But this thing is light and agile and fast, and it's everything you need when you're out in the field. All good things come from the CH-46.
So what type of things were transported in the CH-46, and what were the quantities, you know, just to get a sense of
The
capacity?
the main content was us. We could hitch a ride. We could say, we can't walk that far in that amount of time. We need a lift. CH-46 could fit our whole platoon if some guy sat on the floor. He sat along the edges on sling seats. The windows stayed closed because they were permanent, but all the side doors with the crew chief and the gunners, and there's a little door that goes into the pilot's compartment up there. You sit in those sling seats. You can push the seats up if you need to drive a Jeep or a mule on board. They also come with food in a net sling, hanging on a strap. And the strap goes through a square hole called the hell hole. It's 2 foot by 2 foot, and attaches to the spine of the helicopter overhead. And the crew chief gets down there, and somebody on the ground unhooks the shackles, and he brings the net back empty. Dumps everything as he rises up. So they were the source of food. They were the source of water. They were the source of medicine. They were medevacs. They were transportation, and the most positive thing about them was that as soon as you got up a couple 100 feet in the air, the temperature changed. And now you're in an air-conditioned vehicle flying through the air at 60, 70 miles an hour, and wind is blowing through all the openings. Unfortunately, you can then see all the bullet holes in the ceiling with the sunlight. You start wondering what these spots of light are on the floor. And you realize it's coming from that hole, and that hole is going up, pointing towards the sun. They had green tape, like duct tape. They called it 100-mile-an-hour tape. They tear off a piece and stick it over the hole, and that's all the solution they needed, unless it had punctured a hydraulic line or an electrical cable or something. Then they had some serious repair to do. I accidentally took a picture of what the camera's sitting on my lap, looking out a window, and I thought, well, kind of like the picture, it's not one you'll see every day.
No.
And they had a drawbridge on the back that they could lower down. The crew chief would go to the front where he had a switch, and he would drop the drawbridge down, and everybody could run off or run on. You could carry on bodies in body bags or guys in stretchers, or you could pile off whatever ammunition, or sometimes they would make deliveries. They'd stop this fire base, stop this unit out in the middle of nowhere, stop at these guys by the bridge, and drop off stuff each time. So they were the source of everything good to us. And when they gave you a lift, your whole platoon would be up in the air, and all of a sudden it's cool, dry air. It's air conditioning, and you've just been sweating for a week in super humid hot weather, and it makes you realize how thin the atmosphere is. And there were times I'd be sweltering under a eucalyptus tree or something and looking up and thinking, I just need to get up there 200 feet. I'll be fine, How am I going to do this? Hot air balloon, what? Just anything to get above. And it also gave you a chance to look at the landscape. And that is the Tuolumne River, where one of my bigger firefights happened with the counterintelligence team, and rice paddies all around it. This is number 82 or 92. Yeah, picture number 82. The guy in charge of each helicopter was the crew chief. One of them is seen here looking down, and he's the one who controls everything that happens when it hits the ground. He's really the boss of the helicopter. Often pilots and co-pilots could change, but the crew chief, that's his baby. And so he can get pretty upset if you track mud into his helicopter, or put a dent in it. There's the drawbridge going down, loading stuff on. In the back is a thing called a water buffalo, not to be misunderstood as the contrail animal. The water buffalo is, I forget how many gallons, something immense, with double tires on both sides and a trailer hitch in the front. And that was the source of drinking water if you were going to be permanent somewhere. Could be easily hooked up with a strap and carried off by the next helicopter. I just thought that was a nice picture of a crew chief. He's over his .50 caliber. And this was a kid who was helping me on payday. He was my protection. He had an M16, I had a .45, and we had $40,000, and we were saying, you think we can make it to Mexico before they discover we're gone? He said, we could arrange something with the crew chief on this helicopter. There's a crew chief looking really unhappy. I can't remember what we had done to his helicopter, but I don't think it was mud. I think we were putting dents in it. And this is why they refer to the takeoff as a dust-off. Why most landing zones have a rubber mat or some kind of flooring to prevent that big dust. The last chapter is called Kilo 3 Actual.
Sorry, what is it called?
Kilo 3 Actual. The 3rd platoon of Kilo Company is on the radio. Call sign is Kilo 3. And what that gets you is the platoon radio operator. And he verbally communicates with the platoon commander. But if you want the actual platoon commander on the radio, because you got something secret to say or something private, or something you don't want getting out, then you ask for the actual. Meaning, I don't just want Kilo 3, I want the Kilo 3 actual, the real guy. So I get on there and usually he'll say something about, we had things called whiz wheels that would allow us to encode numbers. Oh. And if we wanted to give our location, we had to put it in code, and we had to burn the interchangeable pages of the whiz wheels. They were clear plastic little things with like a telephone dial. You had to burn pages at the end of a day, and every once in a while I'd get a call from the security officer, the intelligence officer in the rear. He'd go to the Combat Operations Center, ask for Kilo 3. He'd get my radio man, he'd say, give me the actual. He'd get on the line and say, did you burn your code sheets for such and such a day? Because we've got a breach. It appears they're able to decode something, and we're thinking maybe you lost them and they found them or something like that, So usually when they were asking for me, I was in trouble. Something I forgot to do or it just, and I was so underslept most of the time in the field. Not only was it uncomfortable, always trying to get the sticks and rocks out from under you to get to sleep, but I keep waking up in the middle of the night with this image of Asian guy with a AK-47 with a bayonet standing over me, and I always kept the pistol nearby so I could just pick it up and shoot, and between the anxiety, the dozens of things you had to think of and keep track of and juggle, and I've never been good at 8 tracking, and the discomfort, just didn't get a lot of sleep, and so I'd be like a zombie when I get on the phone sometime to talk to I never got a call from the battalion commander, but I did get calls from his executive officer or somebody who said the battalion commander wants you to know this or do this or something. Like, for instance, we changed battalion commanders. So I got a call saying, you're going to get a visit from special people. I'd say, are these special people at a 6 level? Because the commander of the battalion is called 316. 6 is the name of a captain or above. Okay. And I was a lowly lieutenant, so I was just an actual. I don't know, anyway, there's this whole radio code, and it was an indication that the new battalion commander, you put 2 and 2 together and figure the new battalion commander is coming out to visit. They don't want the guys listening in on the radios to know that, because now they got a special target. Hey, we shoot down this helicopter, we've killed off a colonel. So the helicopter lands, and a bunch of guys rush off, and he's a new colonel, and fortunately he was smart enough to hide all his rank insignia. But he walked up to me and said, who's the actual here? And I said, I am, sir. And he said, what's this you got on your keychain? On your dog tag chain. And I said, it's a peace symbol made out of a hand grenade ring with 2 cotter pins. To do it. My radio man, Apollonia, used to do this with the needle nose pliers that came with the radio. And he'd sell them for $1 a pop. And he said it goes to the Apollonia Educational Fund. And so all of us, at least in the command group of 4 or 5 guys for the platoon sergeant, me, the radio man, the 2 corpsmen, I'm trying to think, sometimes the attachments, like the forward observers, we all had peace signs on, and my sister had just sent me a package the day before that had been a month or so getting to me. And this is in March, after Mardi Gras in February. So it took that long for this whole package, this big package of Mardi Gras beads. So all these purple and gold and green and multicolored beads, it's not what you wear when you want to be in combat, but nonetheless, the whole CP group was wearing collections of bright colored beads. And the new battalion commander says, "What's with the peace sign?" I said, "We're fighting for peace, aren't we, sir?" He said, "Okay, you can explain that." Well, what's with the love beads? And they're Mardi Gras beads. And he said, "Yeah." And he said, how many sniper scopes do you think are pointed at your love beads right now?" It was embarrassing. I don't think he was too happy when he left. Maybe that's why I got bumped up to executive officer of H&S Company. They said, this guy's perverting his platoon, you know.
Was it right after the visit that you were bumped up?
No, it was actually a couple of weeks. And it turns out the real reason, I thought it was because they were trying to rotate the young lieutenants into combat, let them see some shooting. They get to wear the combat action ribbon, rotate them out. Now they can have a career, because you're not going to go anywhere in the Marine Corps if you haven't seen combat. You know, it's the good old boys club to this day, I'm sure. It was that the commanding officer of H&S Company had met me over lunch one day. We just had a conversation, and he thought, okay, this is a smart guy, and he seems friendly enough that this is who I want to take the place of my XO who's about to leave. His XO rotated out. He went to the colonel and said, "I want Barker." And I said, "So you're the one I can blame for this miserable condition. Now I'm commanding 2 clerk typists, and I fly a desk, and I've got to remember how to type, and I'm in charge of the 81 mortar platoon, as well as all the trucks and all the recoilless rifles, and the 81 mortar platoon was all the bad guys who were waiting for dishonorable discharges or a court date, and we put them all in there because the 81 mortars were too big to take out to the field. The mortars themselves are like 5 feet tall. So we had no use for them. They didn't have a far enough range to get over the mountains, and they were too heavy to carry out to the field. So we used it like a prison gang or something. You know? They were dangerous. I slept in a different bed every night because I was expecting to hear a grenade come rolling across the floor, you know, under whatever cot I was in.
Wow.
But eventually, when we got back to the States, we got them squared away. Everybody went their way. And then I became their actual platoon commander because I couldn't be executive officer anymore. I wasn't senior enough. But during the war, they threw all those rules to the winds and said, "You pick who you want, you know, whoever you think can do the job." So here's a picture of me. It looks like I've got jungle rot on the cheek, but that's actually just a defect on the photograph. But I don't know who took this picture, but it indicates what a young person I was at the time. Here's enjoying a fine meal of canned goods. I actually liked sea rations, and brought home a case of them when I was stationed later at Camp Pendleton. And now that case is in the National Museum of the Marine Corps.
Oh my!
With my name at the bottom, and one of my peace signs is also on display there. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
This is a field of elephant grass. These tall weeds. There's Apollonia, the radio man in the background. That's me looking at my pistol. That's one of the corpsmen. And this is a couple hours before a big firefight when we pushed our way up into these trees. That's where we ran into a line of them. And I tried to get the squad that was behind me in the column to swing like a gate and hit these guys from their right side. It's just the standard thing to do. You know, it's not clever or anything. But it was chaos. I couldn't tell, and they were retreating as they fired, so the situation was constantly moving. And here is Sergeant McCausland in the middle of these two guys. The black guy is one of the squad leaders. Here are my two other squad leaders. One's name was Talion. I can't remember the other one, but I could figure it out from that little notebook I've got. These are my two medical corpsmen. In the Army, they call for a medic. In the Marine Corps, they call for a corpsman from the medical corps. I don't see what the difference is, but Corpsmen they carry a 45. They're not offensive. They don't shoot at anybody. The 45 is just for self-defense. And they carry a big bag of medical supplies. And these guys are so well trained. They can deliver babies. They can deliver water buffaloes. They can do C-sections. I think they could do open heart surgery if need be. They patch up bullet holes. They treat for shock. They get electrolytes into them. Everybody carries a bag of salt water or sugar water, saline or sucrose solution, so that we always got plenty of anti-shock treatment. We can, and all of us learned to start an IV, you know, find the vein in the elbow and get water into them, because shock was a big issue in some kinds of wounds. This one is this one is Hull, that one is Ganger. Ganger is the senior guy because he had a year more experience than Hull. But they were the first things the enemy would shoot if they could figure out who the corpsmen were. That way, the next guys they shoot can't get any medical attention. And often they would shoot people to wound, so that when the guy went down exposed, everybody, the corpsmen would try to get to him. And they'd often let the corpsmen work until it was time to move the guy. And then it would take at least 2 people to drag him. And that way they could get 2 more and they'd have 3 down. It was just a game of numbers, yeah. This is a bunker in some godforsaken place that I don't remember. But you get to feeling like a rabbit after some time. And one of my favorite pictures this is my company commander for Kilo Company. And the whole, the staff of Kilo Company came to visit us. The captain doesn't have his own troops. We are his troops. So he comes to visit his platoon on a rotating sort of basis. When he got to 3rd Platoon, he was badly in need of a bath, and we had 500-pound bomb craters, the size of a house, filled with what looked like clear water. So there's the captain. Next to him is the company gunnery sergeant, and next to him is his executive officer, and next to him is me. And somebody had a bar soap. So we scrubbed our heads, and because you get sores in your head after a while if you don't get regular cleanup. And there's the second picture. You can see a trooper on the edge of the crater who gives you an idea of scale. These are big holes, and they're all eroded. Yeah. They were much bigger when they first blew up. So when they drop 500-pound bombs, you could fit a small house in one without touching the edges. They're really impressive pieces of armament. And I just think this demonstrates the farmer's tan royally. All the forearms are bright red or brown, and all the faces and necks are red. Everything else is lily white. And when we got out, we discovered leeches up and down our legs. And that was exciting. All you had to do was hold a cigarette up to them, and they would release. Excuse me a minute. Okay. And finally, here's a picture of the only time I got to wear my dress blues after I got out of school. That's with my then girlfriend, later wife, Susan. And we're going to a Mardi Gras ball after getting back. And I have a picture with my mom in that position as well. And I forget which Mardi Gras ball it was, but I'm from New Orleans, and so everybody was expected to be in costume. And when we got to the ball, several people came up and said, "Your costume is so convincing." Thank you. It's a really good rental place, Okay, that's photographs.
Did you want to talk about the?
Yes.
Or yeah.
This is the civilian modern version of this. And this is what I'm so proud of. I'd never seen the like of it from anybody else. And it made me wonder how other guys functioned in the field.
Yeah.
But this was the platoon office. It had everything you needed. It's a 3-ring binder. It's got a mirror in the back, which hopefully will deflect some shrapnel as it tries to pass through getting to you. It was ostensibly so I could shave, but you don't shave in the field. Everybody, you shave when you get to the rear. Why risk another infection by nicking yourself, Plus, it's, who are you dressing up for, In a half an hour, you're going to be sweaty and dirty and, a mess all over again. its main purpose was to keep track of the troops. So everyone in my platoon is listed in here by their rank, their name, in this case E4 Lawrence, comma, P.E., 21 years old. His service number is below that. His blood type, he was A positive. His religious affiliation in this case was none. His rotation date was 28 July. His date of rank was 1 August. His rifle serial number was blah, blah, blah. His parent was George Lawrence of Marysville, California. And 2 years. Oh, and he had 2 years of college.
Oh,
So that would be rare. There's Sergeant Aguilar. He was one of my squad leaders, Catholic, as you might guess. Wife is Paula Cortez in Harlingen, Texas, rifle number, date of birth, etc. So that's useful for when people get wounded. And here's Sergeant McCausland, R.L. His wife's name was Peggy. She was living in Honolulu while he was overseas. A lot of wives stayed in Hawaii because it was an easy shot from Vietnam to Hawaii.
Yeah.
Any married man could have his wife come out for R&R and they'd get a week in Honolulu with their wives. I had a week in Sydney, Australia, because they had an open seat on a plane.
Okay.
And my H&S company commander said, "Get on that plane." I said, look at the stack on my desk. I can't do this. Said, "We're going to be shipping back to the States. I got to get a loading plan for the planes, for how we're going to move the trucks and get them down to the ships for transport." And he said, "I'll cover for you. I'll lie if I have to, but you get on that R&R
Wow.
bird and get a week away from this. You'll be able to function a lot better." And I had a ball. I learned so much about kangaroos. It was really, it turned out to be useful later when I started working in zoos. Probably saved my neck one night when a giant male, looking eye level with me, came in one night while I was painting in his enclosure. And fortunately, I was spray painting a mural of Australian outback, and I turned around and there he was looking at me. They can rock back on their tail and hit you with their back feet and break everything in your torso, rupture all your organs and break all your ribs and kill you. So I'm thinking about this as I'm looking at this guy, thinking what to do, and I got a spray gun full of olive green. I'm thinking, do I spray him? Boy, the keepers will really be mad, But it sure beats being killed.
Yeah, it sure
and
does.
Just then my compressor kicks on. It goes like that. And man, he was up and gone. And I thought, thank you, compressor. Okay, elsewhere in here are plastic-covered things like how to be a witness and what a provost marshal is going to ask you, how to read a guy's rights, how to make an arrest. You are suspected of, you have the right to remain silent. So the Miranda rights were just coming in at that point, I think. And I only had to arrest, half a dozen guys, and it was always for petty stuff. And there's my page, Barker, Catholic, blood type O positive, college.
So if someone was hurt and helicoptered back to the base, to the ship, would you keep track of it in this book, like where is it changed in their whereabouts?
I wish I could say yes, but unfortunately, when someone got on a medevac helicopter, that was the last we ever heard of them. We don't know, couldn't find out if they survived, if they were going to come back to us, or in one case, a trooper came back and he had a job with the cooks because his leg had been injured. And it was clear it was not a deadly wound, but he was on light duty for the rest of his time in the Marine Corps. In here also addresses of girlfriends and loved ones and relatives and things I meant to do when I got out, so I wouldn't forget to go to the Whole Earth Catalog store in Menlo Park, California. And all this other plasticized stuff. Some of this refers to places at Camp Pendleton. Oh, there was my list of how I was going to get up to snuff on my uniforms by buying them from secondhand stores within the Marine Corps. And I got by for a couple of $1,000s and saved myself some real serious money compared to getting everything new, because I was not a career guy, and you know. Okay. In addition are map signals, how you designate, what kind of symbol you use to designate what kind of unit. And this hasn't changed much. In recent times, there was devices that you use for mapping. There were fold-up pages of, let's see, in this case, how to deliver a salute report, a spot report guide. These are all tactical reports. A wounded in action report, a tactical air request. You can see things are bureaucratic even out in the field. All these others are stuff like call for fire. And it's too bad I didn't pay attention to them. I blew my own hill away one night. We had some sniper fire. We couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from, so we put out fire in all directions. And it was a fireworks show. It was really impressive how much tax dollars we burned up in a couple of seconds. But I called in artillery and I asked them for a Willie Peter white phosphorus, because it marks the place. You can't miss it at night. It's a blinding white light, you know. And he was just short of the hill we needed him to hit. So I said, I adjusted the fire for him. I should have stuck to the normal routine, but I just said, add 50 meters and fire for effect. And give me, so he calls back and says, okay, you got 5 rounds of HE coming your way. And I'm hearing through the air, and I'm thinking, that's not a 105. And I said to Sergeant McCausland, listen to that, it sounds like a freight train. And he said, that's a 155, that's the big guns. And I said, oh my God, that's not the Army artillery shooting for us down in Engineer Pass. That's somewhere farther south. And he says, yeah, I don't know where they are.
Oh
and I said,
gosh.
So I don't know what that adjustment means. If they add 50 meters, where's it going to hit? And the answer came when it hit our hill, blew a big hole in the middle of the road.
Oh my goodness.
And proceeded to land, I think 4 rounds before we were able to stop them. They were in the air, you know, and we yelled, shut it off, shut it off. And reverted to a little cussing, I'm afraid, you know. Got a little too excited yelling at them. And a little voice comes on the radio that says, bead window. And I said, who are you? And I'm still cussing. And Sergeant McCausland was saying, sir, that's the cussing monitor. He's at division level listening to anybody who's inappropriately cussing on the radio. I said, you gotta be kidding.
I was thinking too, like, this is like...
One of the really useful cards was the 5-paragraph order. I had to type this up myself because I couldn't find anything like it. The 5 paragraphs are the different things that troops need to know before you issue an order. You got to do it in the right order, like what are we going to do? When are we going to do it? What are the signals while we're doing it? What do we do if this happens? What do you need to know logistically? How do you need to prepare your men? What do you need to carry, etc.? And you do it in the right order, and theoretically everybody is on board in all military situations. The KISS rule was predominant.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. Well, keep it simple, stupid. It became keep it simple and stupid. That way Marines can handle it. Here are military payment certificates, which were beautiful. They came in all colors. They had bison. They had the Mount Rushmore. They had the Statue of Liberty on them. This one is worth a nickel, and this one is worth 50 cents. That's a little presumptuous. These are what we used to find laying out in the field, and we can probably get close-ups of those later. It says basically in Vietnamese, you get rice, you get medical attention, and you get a little bit of land. If you throw your rifle over your shoulder with the muzzle pointed down, raise your hands and surrender to the government of South Vietnam. And so I think that's what Henry saw, something like this.
That,
and I didn't know that they had counter-propaganda they were dropping, but this is what their stuff looked like. And this is a copy off of the internet. And it has awkward phrasing. You'll be warmly welcomed to the Quang Nam Da Province National Front for Liberation. Take this paper, present it to the people, and ask them to lead you to the nearest front committee's office or an IAF unit. I don't know what that is. And at the bottom of the Viet Cong flag it says, "For the happiness of American servicemen in South Vietnam."
Yeah. Or
I just love Massacred English. You know, they never had live translators that I can figure. So I think that's all the interesting stuff. But this allowed me to keep track of what was going on and use the map. I had a plasticized map. In other words, the same
same size.
shelf lining with plastic on both sides so it could get rained on. And so you couldn't roll it, you had to fold it, and it had pre-plotted artillery targets. You could just say target number so-and-so.
Wow.
You know, and I'll adjust from there. And it had all kinds of information written on it. It had grease pencils in 3 colors that came with it. And you'd use a handkerchief or your sleeve or something to wipe off the stuff. And I had a great pair of binoculars I had bought on Okinawa that were Zeiss. And they had mirrors in them, so almost like a periscope, so that the tubes were up here, but they were much longer because of this bouncing thing it did, and you could spot something. You didn't have to hunt around like you do with most binoculars. You had a broad field of vision, and then you could just turn a wheel and zoom in on stuff.
Wow.
So when I left the field, my replacement came up. I gave him the map and the grease pencils and the binoculars. And I'm really sorry to have given up those binoculars, but boy, they really made the job easier, you know. I never did get a picture of myself with the binoculars because that's gungy, you know. Look like you know what you're doing, you know. Okay.
Well, Will, thank you so much, and thank you for coming back and sharing the photos and
my pleasure.
And the map and gives us more of a tangible understanding. So
You're
thank
very
you.
welcome.